Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of the gun was cold against his temple, but not nearly as cold as the rain soaking through his ruined Italian suit, or the freezing realization that the man holding him at gunpoint was the only person who had ever made him feel alive. "Do it, Kieran," Julian whispered, his voice cracking against the roar of the thunder, his eyes locked onto the dark, conflicted gaze of the man who was supposed to be his subordinate. "Pull the trigger and earn your freedom, or drop it and belong to me forever." 3 days earlier, the hierarchy had been clear. Crystal clear. Julian Vance was the crown prince of logistics, the heir apparent to Vance Global, a man whose silhouette was usually framed by the floor-to-ceiling windows of a 40-story office in downtown Seoul. He was a creature of silk ties, sterile environments, and ruthless efficiency. He did not sweat. He did not falter. And he certainly did not ride in the cabs of 18-wheelers. Kieran was the dirt beneath the wheels. A pahinant, a truck helper. He was a slab of raw muscle and bad attitude, hired off the docks because he could lift a refrigerator on his own and because his criminal record made him desperate enough to take the jobs no one else wanted. He smelled of cheap tobacco and diesel. He was everything Julian despised: chaotic, unrefined, and dangerously masculine. But necessity makes for strange bedfellows. The cargo was the Obsidian file, hard drives containing evidence of Julian's uncle embezzling millions from the Yakuza. It couldn't be flown. The airspace was watched. It couldn't be transferred digitally. The servers were compromised. It had to be moved physically from the port of Busan to a safe house in the mountains, under the cover of the worst typhoon of the season. "I don't need a babysitter," Kieran had growled when Julian climbed into the passenger seat of the massive Scania truck. The cab was cramped, smelling of stale coffee and the pine tree air freshener dangling from the mirror. Julian adjusted his cuff, refusing to look at the man in the grease-stained tank top. "And I don't trust a convicted felon with my life's work. Drive. And try not to hit anything." "Your funeral, boss," Kieran sneered, jamming the truck into gear. The engine roared, a beast waking up, vibrating through the soles of Julian's polished Oxfords. The first 6 hours were an exercise in psychological warfare. The rain hammered against the windshield, turning the world into a gray smear. Inside, the silence was thick enough to choke on. Julian typed furiously on his tablet, the blue light illuminating the sharp angles of his face. Kieran drove with one hand on the wheel, the other hanging out the window despite the rain, smoke trailing from a cigarette. "Put that out," Julian ordered, not looking up. "You're polluting my air." Kieran took a long, slow drag, his eyes watching Julian through the rearview mirror. He had eyes like coal, dark, intense, and mocking. "This is my office, Prince. You're just a guest. If you don't like the smell, you can walk. Do not mistake my presence for tolerance, Kieran. One word from me, and you're back in prison." Kieran laughed, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate in Julian's chest. "You think I'm scared of a cage? Look around you, Vance. You're in a $3,000 suit, terrified of a little smoke, guarding a box of secrets that could get you killed. You're in a bigger cage than I ever was." Julian stiffened. He turned his head slowly, his icy gaze clashing with Kieran's fire. "At least I own my cage. You're just the hired help cleaning up the mess. For now," Kieran muttered, flicking the cigarette out into the storm. "For now." The shift happened at the mountain pass. The roads were slick, winding serpents of asphalt treacherous under the deluge. The truck groaned as it climbed, the heavy cargo weighing it down. Suddenly, a black sedan drifted around the hairpin turn ahead, its headlights blinded them. It wasn't an accident. The sedan swerved directly into their lane. "Hold on," Kieran roared. He slammed on the brakes and wrenched the wheel. The truck jackknifed. The world spun. Metal screamed, a horrific, high-pitched shriek of steel grinding against guardrails. Julian was thrown against the door, his head cracking against the glass. The world went white, then black. When Julian opened his eyes, the world was sideways. The truck had tipped, sliding halfway down a muddy embankment before getting wedged against a cluster of ancient pines. The windshield was shattered. Rain was pouring in, freezing cold. "Julian." The voice was rough, panicked. "Not boss. Julian." Strong hands grabbed his shoulders. Julian gasped, pain shooting through his left leg. He looked down. His trousers were torn, and blood was soaking the fabric. "My leg," Julian hissed, the composure of the CEO crumbling into the raw fear of a wounded animal. "I've got you. Don't look at it." Kieran was hovering over him, suspended by his grip on the steering wheel. There was a gash on Kieran's forehead, blood mixing with the rainwater running down his face, making him look demonic. "We have to move. The fuel tank is ruptured. I can smell it. I can't walk." "I didn't ask you to walk." Kieran unbuckled Julian's seatbelt, and gravity took over. Julian fell, but he didn't hit the dashboard. Kieran caught him, one arm under his knees, the other around his back, hauling him up as if he weighed nothing. The strength of the man was terrifying. Julian could feel the hard muscles of Kieran's chest against his cheek, the rapid thud of his heart. They scrambled out of the broken windshield, sliding down the muddy slope into the ravine below. Behind them, the truck groaned. A spark, somewhere in the engine, hissed the leaking fumes. Boom. The explosion lit up the night sky. The heat wave washed over them, pushing them face first into the mud. Julian shielded his head, trembling. When the debris settled, they were alone in the dark, the burning wreck above them acting as a beacon to anyone looking. "We need cover," Kieran panted, dragging Julian up. "There are caves further down the ravine. I saw them on the map." "The drive," Julian gasped, clutching Kieran's wet shirt. "The data." "I grabbed the bag," Kieran growled, nodding to the waterproof duffel slung over his shoulder. "Now shut up and let me save your life." The cave was small, damp, and smelled of earth, but it was dry. Kieran deposited Julian on a flat rock, immediately stripping off his own soaked tank top. His torso was a landscape of violence. Scars intersected across his broad back and olive skin, telling stories of knife fights and prison riots. Julian, shivering violently from shock and hypothermia, couldn't look away. In the corporate world, bodies were hidden beneath layers of wool and cotton. Here, Kieran was raw power. "We need to get you warm," Kieran said, his voice dropping an octave. He didn't ask for permission. He knelt before Julian and began unbuttoning the ruined designer shirt. "What are you doing?" Julian's voice trembled, his hands weakly trying to push Kieran away. "You're freezing, and you're losing blood. If you keep the wet clothes on, you'll go into shock." Kieran's hands were large, rough calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as he peeled the wet fabric from Julian's skin. I am your employer," Julian stammered, clinging to the last shreds of his dignity. "You're a man bleeding in a cave," Kieran corrected, locking eyes with him. The darkness of the cave made the space between them feel intimate, suffocating. "Status doesn't exist down here, Julian. Money doesn't burn. Titles don't stop the cold." Kieran finished stripping Julian to his boxers, then pulled him close. It was a tactical decision, body heat sharing, but as Kieran's bare chest pressed against Julian's shivering skin, the dynamic shifted. Julian gasped at the contact. Kieran was a furnace. "Better," Kieran murmured, his lips inches from Julian's ear. "Yes," Julian breathed, hating how safe he felt in the arms of a criminal, hating how his body reacted to the scent of rain and musk on Kieran's skin. Kieran wrapped his arms tighter around Julian, his chin resting on Julian's shoulder. "Why did you come on this run, Julian? You have armies of people to do this." "Because there was a mole," Julian whispered, the exhaustion making him honest. "Someone in my inner circle. My uncle. He bought everyone. I didn't know who to trust." "So you trusted the ex-con?" Kieran let out a dry chuckle. "You have a code," Julian said softly. "You're a brute, Kieran. You're violent and rude. But you owed a debt to my father. And I knew you wouldn't break a vow." Kieran pulled back slightly, looking at Julian's face in the dim light. His thumb brushed a streak of mud from Julian's cheekbone. The touch was electric. "You think you have me figured out," Kieran whispered. His gaze dropped to Julian's lips, then back up to his eyes. The hunger there was undeniable. It wasn't the hunger of a subordinate. It was the hunger of a wolf looking at a lamb that had wandered into its den. "I think," Julian's breath hitched. "I think I was wrong about a lot of things." Kieran leaned in. The kiss wasn't tentative. It was a collision. Kieran claimed Julian's mouth with the same intensity he drove the truck, possessive, demanding, rough. Julian froze for a second, his mind screaming at him to push the help away, but his body betrayed him. His hands tangled in Kieran's wet hair, pulling him closer. It was a kiss that tasted of blood and desperation. It was the release of 3 days of pent-up hostility. It was the shattering of the glass ceiling. When they broke apart, breathless, Kieran's forehead rested against Julian's. When we get back, things change. If we get back, Julian corrected, though his voice lacked its usual bite. I'll get you back, Kieran vowed, his voice dark and low. Even if I have to kill every one of them. The moment was shattered by the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel outside. Flashlight beams cut through the rain. Voices. Men speaking in Japanese. The retrieval team, sent by the uncle. They hadn't just caused the crash. They had come down to finish the job. Kieran's expression instantly shifted from lover to killer. He reached into the duffel bag, but not for the hard drives. He pulled out a heavy, matte black pistol. You have a gun? Julian stared. Helper's job covers a lot of duties, Kieran said grimly. He checked the magazine. Stay here. Stay behind the rock. Kieran, there's too many of them. Kieran looked back, a sad, crooked smile on his face. Then I better make the first shots count. He moved like a shadow, slipping out of the cave into the storm. The next few minutes were a blur of noise. Gunshots cracked like whips. Shouts of confusion. The sickening sound of bodies hitting the mud. Julian pressed his hands over his ears, curled in a ball, the terror of losing Kieran far outweighing the terror of dying. Then, silence. Julian waited. 1 minute. 2. Kieran, he called out, his voice trembling. A figure stumbled into the cave entrance. Kieran. He was clutching his side, dark blood oozing between his fingers, mixing with the rain. Kieran. Julian scrambled forward, ignoring the pain in his leg. Kieran collapsed into Julian's arms, sliding down against the rock wall. Got him, he wheezed, a bloody smile on his lips. All 4. The truck helper. Earns his keep. You idiot, Julian sobbed, pressing his hands against Kieran's wound. You reckless, stupid idiot. Hey, Kieran coughed, grimacing. Don't fire me yet. I'm not firing you, Julian said, his voice fierce, commanding, the CEO returning, but with a new, terrifying edge. He ripped the remnants of his expensive shirt to bind Kieran's wound. You are never leaving my side. Do you hear me? I am doubling your salary. I am buying you a house. I am going to ruin anyone who ever touched you. Kieran chuckled, his eyes fluttering shut. Sounds possessive. I am, Julian whispered, leaning down to kiss the sweat from Kieran's brow. Stay with me, Kieran. That's an order. 2 weeks later. The sterile white of the VIP hospital suite was a stark contrast to the muddy cave. Julian sat in the armchair, his leg in a cast, dressed in a fresh, tailored suit. He was reading a report on his tablet, the dissolution of his uncle's assets, the arrests made thanks to the obsidian file. The door opened. Kieran walked in. He looked different. The grease stains were gone, replaced by a simple but high-quality black button-down shirt that strained against his shoulders. He moved a bit stiffly, favoring his left side, but he was alive. He stopped at the foot of the bed, looking at Julian. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the memory of the cave. The HR department sent me paperwork, Kieran said, tossing a folder onto Julian's lap. Says my position as truck helper has been terminated. Julian didn't look at the folder. He looked at Kieran. He saw the man who had carried him through hell. He saw the only person who had ever seen him stripped of his armor and hadn't looked away. That position is beneath you now, Julian said smoothly, setting his tablet aside. He stood up, using his cane, and closed the distance between them. So I'm unemployed? Kieran raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. No, Julian said, stepping into Kieran's personal space. He reached out, his manicured fingers adjusting the collar of Kieran's shirt, letting his hand linger on the side of Kieran's neck. He could feel the pulse there. Strong. Steady. I created a new position. Head of personal security. It requires 24/7 attendance. You live where I live. You go where I go. Kieran's eyes darkened. And the duties? Protecting the asset, Julian whispered, tilting his head back to look into Kieran's eyes. And other duties as assigned by the CEO. Kieran smirked, that dangerous, wolfish grin returning. He wrapped an arm around Julian's waist, pulling him flush against him, mindful of the injuries but possessive all the same. I think I can handle the workload. Kieran murmured, leaning down to capture Julian's lips. And that is how the wolf came to guard the throne. If you enjoyed seeing the Ice Prince melt for his protector, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you risk your life for a boss who hated you if you secretly loved him? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece, best quality, high-res. 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art. 2 men, BL, Yaoi, man 1. Kieran, muscular, tan skin, messy wet black hair, scars on torso, wearing unbuttoned wet shirt. Intense protective expression, holding a gun. Man 2. Julian, pale skin, refined features, expensive suit ruined and muddy, wounded leg, leaning vulnerably against man 1, looking up with longing. Background is a dark wet cave interior with rain falling outside the entrance. Dramatic chiaroscuro lighting, emotional atmosphere, cinematic composition, sharp focus, intricate details.